At 02:17 hours on 14 February 1944, Corporal Thomas Edward Hale lay motionless in the snow outside Cisterna. The drainage culvert was barely 3 feet wide, its concrete rim crusted with ice. Meltwater seeped through Hale's wool trousers and pooled beneath his ribs, cold enough to burn. He did not shift, he did not curse. He had learned years earlier that cold was easier to endure than noise. Above him, the ground sloped gently toward a cluster of stone farm buildings requisitioned by the Germans 3 weeks prior. A staff car sat idling beside the largest structure, its engine ticking unevenly at low RPM, the smell of diesel exhaust hanging heavy in the air. Hale breathed through his nose, slow, measured, 4 seconds in, 4 seconds out. Each exhale fogged briefly, then vanished. The temperature hovered at 3 degrees Celsius, just cold enough to stiffen fingers and slow reaction time. A light wind, no more than 8 miles per hour, pushed snow across the field in thin, whispering sheets. Visibility was poor, 30 to 40 yards at best, the moon breaking through clouds in short, unreliable intervals. Hale's gloved hands rested on the weapon officers had laughed at 3 days earlier. It was an M3 submachine gun, chambered in, 45 ACP, weighing just over 8 pounds loaded. The stamped steel receiver was scarred and dulled, the barrel shortened by nearly 2 inches. At the muzzle, a crude wire-end washer suppressor, fabricated from scrap and friction tape, sat slightly off-center. It would never pass inspection. It was never meant to, useless beyond 30 yards, the lieutenant had said. A gangster's toy, another had added. Hale had said nothing. Inside the farmhouse, 9 German officers were gathered around a table, regimental staff by their insignia. 2 enlisted orderlies moved in and out, carrying maps and mugs of thin coffee. Hale had counted them earlier at 01:52 when the lights first came on. He counted again now, silently matching voices to shadows cast against the frost-clouded windows. The nearest officer stood 18 feet from the culvert, just outside the door, stamping his boots against the cold. A major, judging by the collar tabs, the farthest and oberst maybe, sat at the table 71 feet away, his profile occasionally silhouetted as he leaned over a map. Hale had 12 minutes, no artillery support, no diversion. No second man, the patrol that had brought him this far was already pulling back, their orders clear, observe only. Hale had stayed behind without permission, slipping into the culvert as the others faded into the dark. If he survived, there would be consequences. If he failed, there would be nothing. The metal of the M3 felt like ice through his gloves. He loosened his grip slightly, flexed his fingers once, then settled again. The wire stock pressed into the notch of his collarbone. He adjusted it by less than an inch, muscle memory from long nights of practice no one had authorized. He listened. German voices drifted out, low, confident, unhurried. Paper slid across wood, a chair scraped. Somewhere a man laughed quietly. Hale smelled cordite on his own clothes, old and faint, mixed with wet wool and engine exhaust. His heart rate slowed. He was no longer thinking in minutes. He was thinking in angles. At 02:18, the officer by the door turned slightly, exposing his left side. Hale noted the angle, 15 degrees off center mass, and the way the moonlight caught the edge of the man's cap. He traced the line in his mind from muzzle to sternum, accounting for distance, for drop, for the way subsonic rounds behaved in cold air. The safety clicked off. It was a small sound, too small to hear over the engine. Hale exhaled and held it, the world narrowing to the front sight post, dark against pale snow. He felt the cold bite deeper now, creeping into his wrists, his jaw. He ignored it. At 2:19, a gust of wind pushed smoke from the staff car across the yard, briefly obscuring the doorway. Hale waited. He had learned patience long before the army. Patience and timing were the difference between clean work and noise. The smoke thinned. Hale squeezed the trigger. The weapon coughed once, flat, muted, not the roar officers expected, but a dull mechanical thud. There was no muzzle flash. The officer by the door jerked sharply, as if pulled backward by a rope, and vanished from view. Hale did not look to confirm. He shifted the muzzle 6 inches right, already moving, already counting. Inside the farmhouse, voices stopped. For half a second, there was only the sound of the idling engine and the wind over snow. Then someone shouted. The door burst open. Hale was already firing. The night swallowed the sound, and then nothing. No return fire, no alarm, just silence settling back over the field, thicker than before. By dawn, the Germans would abandon the position without understanding why. By morning report, 9 officers would be listed as killed in an unclear engagement. And in the next 38 minutes, everything would change. Thomas Edward Hale was born at 04:40 hours on 7 June 1919, in a narrow brick row house on South Union Avenue in Chicago, in the stretch of the city locals called Back of the Yards. The neighborhood existed for one purpose, work. Everything else was incidental. By the time Hale could walk, he understood the rhythms of labor. The packing houses woke before dawn. Steam vents hissed like animals in pain. Whistles marked the hours more reliably than clocks. The air smelled of blood, salt, coal smoke, and wet hides. On summer days, the stench clung to clothes and hair. In winter, it froze into something sharp and metallic. His father, Edward Hale, worked the rail spurs that fed the stockyards, lifting, coupling, loading. In March 1931, when Thomas was 11, a slipping iron hook crushed 2 vertebrae in Edward's lower back. The company doctor declared him unfit for heavy labor. The compensation lasted 6 weeks. After that, money came in pieces. Thomas watched his mother stitch until her fingers bled, watched his father limp and smoke in silence. There was no talk of ambition in the Hale household. There was only endurance. You did what you could do, and you did it quietly. Thomas learned early to stay out of the way and to watch. By 1936, at age 17, he left school and took a job as a tool-and-die apprentice at a small machine shop off Halsted Street. It was a night shift operation, 12 men and 2 lathes, producing replacement parts for agricultural equipment and rail fittings. The pay was low, the expectations were not. The shop foreman, a Slovak immigrant named Merk, believed mistakes should be memorable. A miscut piece was not discarded, it was nailed above the offending worker's bench. Hale's early work hung there twice in his first month. He learned, 5 nights a week from 18:00 to 0:40, Hale stood at the lathe. The machine vibrated constantly, a low, bone-deep hum that carried up through his boots and into his jaw. Cutting oil-coated everything, hands, sleeves, the smell of it following him home no matter how much he scrubbed. Tolerances were measured in thousandths of an inch. Too much pressure and the tool bit wrong, too little and the cut wandered. There was no room for haste. Speed ruined work, silence preserved it. Over 5 years and 4 months, Hale learned how metal behaved under stress, how heat changed grain, how vibration traveled, how crude tools could be coaxed into precision if handled correctly. He learned to fix broken equipment with scrap and wire because waiting for replacements cost hours, and hours cost jobs. No one praised him. Merck simply stopped checking his work. On 7 December 1941, the radio announcement came over the shop speaker just after 22:00, Pearl Harbor. A few men swore, one laughed, sharp and nervous. The machines kept running for another minute before Merck shut the power. Hale finished his cut anyway, easing the tool away cleanly before stepping back. He enlisted 5 days later, on 12 December 1941, reporting to an Army recruiting station on West 63rd Street. He was 22 years old, weighed 168 pounds, and listed his occupation as machinist. The sergeant barely looked up. Basic training took Hale farther from Chicago than he had ever been. He arrived at Camp Roberts in January 1942, stepping off the train into dry air that smelled of dust and sage instead of coal and blood. The days were hot, the nights cold, the routines loud. Hale struggled with drill. He was slow to shout. His rifle marksmanship scores were average, qualification, not excellence. But when weapons jammed on the range, they found their way to him. When a firing pin cracked, Hale improvised a fix that held for the rest of the day. The instructors warned him not to repeat it. He nodded and did not argue. He learned the Army the same way he had learned the shop, by observing what actually mattered. By mid-1942, Hale was assigned to a rifle company that would later be folded into the 36th Infantry Division. Within his squad, he earned nicknames, Wirehands, Clockmaker. He never introduced himself. He fixed things, that was enough. The officers noticed him only when they had to. One lieutenant told him, "You think too much." Hale accepted the criticism as information. In April 1943, the division shipped out. East Coast ports, cramped transport holds, the constant vibration of engines beneath steel decks. Hale spent the crossing cleaning weapons, counting rivets overhead, noting how salt air changed the feel of metal. He said little. Others filled the silence for him. North Africa came and went in a blur of heat and dust. Italy followed, green hills, stone villages, winter rain. By early 1944, Hale had seen men die because weapons failed when doctrine said they should not. He had watched officers dismiss field modifications as unnecessary. He did not argue. He began preparing. By the time the Anzio sector ground itself into stalemate, Hale was still just another corporal, quiet, competent, unremarkable on paper. But the skills he had learned in a Chicago machine shop at night were about to matter more than any manual, and the Army did not yet know it. By late January 1944, the Anzio beachhead had ceased to be a landing operation and become something else entirely, an argument fought with bodies. The front lines around Anzio shifted by yards, not miles, and then only when someone paid for it. The doctrine governing American patrols had not shifted at all. Orders written for open terrain and daylight movement were being enforced in flooded vineyards and olive groves at night. Patrols were pushed forward to maintain pressure, to establish presence, phrases that looked clean on paper and lethal in practice. Men moved in files that made sense on maps and none at all in the dark. They carried weapons designed to dominate space with noise, M1 Garands, Thompson submachine guns, their reports sharp enough to carry for miles in still winter air. German units opposing them had learned quickly. They did not patrol aggressively. They waited. They placed listening posts forward and let American noise do the work. When contact was made, it was never isolated. Flares went up within seconds, mortars followed. By February, patrol casualty rates in some companies approached 30%. The numbers were discussed in staff tents, circled in grease pencil, then accepted as the cost of maintaining pressure. Corporal Thomas Hale read the after-action reports because no one told him not to. He compared them to what he saw. The two never matched. On 29 January 1944, at 23:41, Private First Class Eugene Malley, age 19, from Scranton, Pennsylvania, was killed when a patrol's lead element tripped a German listening post near the Mussolini Canal. The initial burst from an MP-40 hit Malley in the throat. He was dead before he hit the ground. The patrol withdrew under mortar fire, leaving his body unrecovered for 2 days. On 2 February at 1:12, Staff Sergeant Harold Vickers, 27, from Topeka, Kansas, was struck by shrapnel from an 81 mortar while attempting to pull his men back after an ambush. He bled out in the mud in less than 3 minutes. His platoon sergeant later reported that the Germans had been alerted by the sound of a Thompson fired prematurely. On 5 February, just after midnight, Private Louis Morneau, 22, from El Paso, Texas, died screaming when a flare exposed his patrol crossing open ground. Machine gun fire followed immediately. He took 4 rounds in the torso before anyone could move him. Hale heard the gunfire from nearly half a mile away. He counted the seconds between bursts and knew, without being told, what had happened. The reports described enemy contact and effective resistance. They did not describe the sound men made when they realized they had been seen. The death that ended Hale's patience came on 9 February 1944 at 2:06 hours. Private Samuel Red Kincaid, 24, from Davenport, Iowa, was moving beside Hale along a drainage ditch south of the flyover when a German flare burst overhead. The light turned the world white. Hale felt the heat on his face, smelled the chemical burn of it. Kincaid froze. He had time to look at Hale, just long enough to register surprise before a single shot cracked from the darkness. The round entered beneath Kincaid's left eye and exited behind the ear. He fell without a sound. Hale felt the impact through the mud as much as he heard it. They lay there for 90 seconds, motionless, until the firing stopped. Hale dragged Kincaid's body back by the collar, his gloves slipping on blood that was already cooling. Kincaid weighed more dead than alive. Everyone did. Back at the line, Hale cleaned his weapon mechanically, hands steady, jaw tight. At 04:30, he walked to the platoon command post. He did not raise his voice. He explained plainly that the patrols were being heard before they were seen, that the Germans were not guessing, they were reacting. He suggested shorter barrels, reduced loads, controlled fire. He suggested silence. The lieutenant listened with his arms crossed. "That's not regulation," he said. "We don't improvise weapons in the field." Hale nodded. He tried again 2 days later, submitting a written request for authorization to modify a limited number of M3 submachine guns for reconnaissance work. The request moved upward and came back stamped DENIED. The margin note read, "Operational risk outweighs potential benefit." Hale was warned informally not to pursue the matter further. He did not argue, he did not complain. He went back to his hooch and began counting what he had. Wire, washers, tape, ammunition he trusted, tools no one logged. He knew the cost of being wrong. He also knew the cost of waiting. On 13 February, as patrol orders came down again, Hale made his decision. He would act once. He would accept whatever followed. The outbuilding sat 312 yards behind the forward line, half collapsed, its stone walls blackened by age and moisture. It had once been a storage shed for olive presses. By February 1944, it held nothing but broken crates, rusted hinges, and silence. At 21:40 hours on 12 February, Corporal Thomas Hale stepped inside and closed the door behind him. The light came from a single shuttered lantern, its flame turned low and yellow. Hale laid the M3 submachine gun across an upturned crate and removed his gloves. The metal bit at his fingers immediately. He ignored it. The standard M3 barrel measured 8 inches. Hale reduced it to 6 1 inches, working slowly, filing rather than cutting, keeping the crown square by feel more than sight. Each stroke was deliberate. Metal dust collected in the creases of his palms. He wiped it away and continued. The suppressor came next. It was not elegant. Hale never expected it to be. He threaded 4 steel washers onto a length of stiff electrical wire, spacing them by hand-measured gaps no wider than a pencil. Between them he packed strips of oil-soaked cloth torn from a discarded maintenance rag. The assembly was wrapped tight, tension adjusted by twisting the wire ends until the resistance felt right, not too rigid, not loose enough to shift under recoil. He secured it with friction tape, then again with cloth strips, binding the whole assembly until it felt like one piece. The added weight, just under 11 ounces, shifted the balance forward. Hale noted it and compensated, adjusting the wire stock length by half an inch. He selected his ammunition carefully. Subsonic, 45 ACP, brass-cased rounds he had personally checked for consistency. In cold air, velocity mattered less than reliability. Supersonic cracks were unacceptable. When he finished, the weapon weighed 4 pounds loaded, slightly front-heavy, acceptable at 23. 12. Hale reassembled the M3 and worked the bolt twice. The action cycled smoothly. He did it again, no binding, no scrape. He sat back and waited, listening to the distant artillery thumps roll through the ground. At 0:34 hours on 13 February, Hale lay prone in a flooded vineyard, 600 yards from the nearest sentry. The mud soaked through his sleeves. Frost clung to the vine stumps. He fired 1 round into the earth. The sound was not silence, but it was close. A dull mechanical cough swallowed by distance and wind. Hale waited 30 seconds listening. Nothing, no shouts, no flares. He fired again. This time he paced it out 50 steps, then 70, then 100, listening at each distance. Beyond 60 yards, the sound vanished into the night. What remained was indistinguishable from engine noise or shifting equipment. He made one adjustment, tightening the wrap by a quarter turn. At 1:11 he stopped. Enough testing invited mistakes. The patrol stepped off at 1:42. Official orders: observe enemy movement. Hale carried out his role without deviation until 0:23, when the patrol reached the drainage line. He waited 30 seconds after the last man passed before slipping away. By 2:17 he was in position, the same culvert outside the farmhouse near Cisterna. He had 12 minutes before the patrol's scheduled withdrawal made his absence noticeable. His odds of survival by any honest estimate were below 20%. He did not calculate further. 0:19, first officer down, single round, 18 feet, immediate collapse, 0:20. Second target appeared in the doorway, pistol in hand. Hale fired twice, center mass, then upper chest. Distance 22 feet. The man fell backward inside. Shouts erupted. German voices overlapped, sharp with confusion. 2:21. Hale shifted position by 4 feet, crawling along the culvert. He fired into the doorway again as a third officer stepped into view. 1 round, 27 feet. Inside, chairs scraped. Someone overturned a table. 0:22. A flare was fumbled but never launched. Hale saw the glint of metal, adjusted, fired. The flare clattered uselessly to the floor. 0:23. Hale paused, listened. The engine still idled. No alarm yet. He advanced 6 yards, staying low, closing the distance. 0:25. Fourth and fifth targets crossed his line of fire near the table. Hale fired controlled pairs, counting recoil, letting the weapon settle. Distances 43 and 46 feet, both dropped. The smell of cordite mixed with blood reached him now, metallic and warm against the cold. 0:27. An orderly ran for the back door. Hale tracked him through the window and fired once, 71 feet. The man collapsed halfway across the room. 0:29. Silence broken only by groans. 0:30. Hale waited, patience again. A senior officer emerged, pistol raised, shouting orders that went unanswered. Hale fired twice. The man spun and fell forward, insignia catching the light. 0:32. The last 2 officers attempted to regroup near the radio set. Hale advanced another 3 yards, knelt, and fired 4 rounds in measured cadence. Both men dropped. Total rounds fired, 14. Total time, 13 minutes. By 0:35, the farmhouse was still. Hale withdrew the way he came, moving deliberately, resisting the urge to hurry. His hands trembled only once he reached cover. He sat in the mud for 3 minutes, breathing, counting heartbeats until the shaking stopped. No pursuit came. At dawn, German positions in the sector were abandoned. Hale rejoined his unit without comment. No report recorded what he had done, but the night patrols grew quieter after that, and fewer men failed to come back. The first sign that something had changed came at 6:10 hours on 14 February 1944, when forward observers reported that German positions opposite the sector near Cisterna were unmanned. No withdrawal order had been intercepted. No artillery preparation preceded it. The enemy had simply gone. Patrols pushed forward cautiously, expecting a trap. They found abandoned field phones, half-burned documents, still warm engine blocks. Inside the farmhouse, the bodies had been removed during the night efficiently, without ceremony. Bloodstains remained on the stone floor where water had not yet frozen them solid. Word spread the way it always did at the line, sideways. No official briefing mentioned 9 dead officers. No intelligence summary highlighted the disruption of a regimental command element. But enlisted men noticed that for the first time in weeks, the night had not erupted in flares and mortars. Someone said quietly, "They didn't hear us." Someone else replied, "Maybe they couldn't." By the third night after the engagement, 2 separate squads in adjacent companies began taping cloth around their barrels. Another swapped ammunition with a tank crewman to get lower velocity rounds. No one credited Hale by name. No one needed to. The idea mattered more than the man. Between 15 February and 10 March 1944, night patrol casualty rates in Hale's battalion dropped from an average of 28% to just under 11%. The figures were not dramatic enough to make headlines. They were not even dramatic enough to warrant a doctrinal review. But among platoon sergeants and squad leaders, men who counted their strength in faces, not charts, the change was unmistakable. Patrols returned intact. Listening posts were bypassed instead of blundered into. When contact occurred, it was brief and one-sided. German countermeasures lagged. Their responses, flares, mortars, rapid reinforcement, were calibrated to noise that no longer came. For the first time since Anzio, the night favored the Americans. At the company level, the response was silence. At the battalion level, it was discomfort. On 22 February, Hale was summoned to the command post. A captain leafed through reports without looking up. He asked no direct questions. He made no accusations. "You're not authorized to modify issued equipment," the captain said finally. Hale stood at parade rest, mud still on his boots. He did not deny it. The captain sighed, "Don't do it again." No paperwork followed, no commendation, no reprimand. The matter was closed because acknowledging it would require explanation. An explanation would raise questions no one wanted to answer about why it had taken an enlisted machinist to solve a problem doctrine had created. Hale remained a corporal. By early March, German units opposite the beachhead adjusted. Listening posts were pulled back. Officers no longer congregated forward at night. Orders were relayed by runners instead of radios. Command elements dispersed. The enemy had not learned who struck them, but they had learned how. The advantage narrowed again, as all advantages do in war, but the window had been long enough. Ground had been taken. Pressure maintained without hemorrhage. The beachhead held. Thomas Edward Hale was discharged in November 19